Okay. Uh, so the motion is this house prefers a world where family love was seen as unconditional as opposed to conditional.
Right. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, currently it is visible with the zoom on it. Let's see if it stays visible on the YouTube.
Yeah.
Uh, can you just also share computer sound because we can see we cannot hear.
Okay. It audible?
No, you need to share computer sound. The way to do this is um,
Mm-hmm.
if you see the bar that you have of Zoom at the top and you press the 3 points on the right, there should be share computer sound.
All right. Where exactly? I'm not able to find it.
Share, enter share screen.
Yeah.
Just share the tab itself, not the full screen, but like the internet tab.
Okay.
Okay, when you press share screen, can you see that there's a window which says entire screen, then application windows, and on the right, there's presenter layout and below it share options?
Just a second.
So under the share options, there should be a share sound option.
Okay. Is the sound audible now?
No.
Okay. I'm not able to see that option.
Okay,
Uh,
again. Um, if you click the share screen at the bottom bar, can you see a pop-up screen?
yeah.
In this pop-up screen, on the right, at the right bottom, is there a share options with a list you can tap out of?
Yeah, I can't see that option. Just give me a second. I'll sort this out.
Do you see presenter layout on the right top?
No, no. I can't see that kind of option. I'll just see.
It, it, it won't be in the speakers because you're not using the speakers to share sound.
Yeah.
What do you see if you press the just the share screen at the bottom? Can I see what happens
I
when
just
you click it?
see I just see the option to share my screen.
Can you show me for a second?
Okay. Is it visible now?
Okay, can you tap the right arrow?
Uh,
Like
the right.
no, below that, can you see that next to the share screen there's an upwards
Yeah. The,
small arrow thing? Yes. Hold on. Advanced settings.
no.
I'm just wondering why you don't see the same screen as I do.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, I can share it. The only issue is then I'm not sure how I would type at the same time, and I would want to practice tracking with everyone.
Just to pitch in, I'm so sorry, but maybe a problem is that the entire screen is being shared and not the tab itself. So like, just like try stop sharing once, and then the next time that you click on share, just like stop sharing right now, and click on share. Do not click on entire screen. Click just on the tab. I think that's when you get options for like sharing computer audio and stuff. Harsh.
Yeah, I'll try once. Though I tried it earlier, but it did not. Uh, I couldn't do it. I'll try it again, the way you said.
Mm, that is still the entire screen.
Yeah.
Okay. In favor of time, let's do
Mhm.
this. Okay. I'll share screen with the video. And just tell me one quick thing. Okay. When I do this, if I hold on, if I also open my notes separately, does that pause the screen share? Or do you still see the screen?
I think it pauses the screen share.
Uh,
Okay, fun times.
Wait. I think it's
just
downloading.
try. Yeah, the video is not playing. Try playing the video and then try switching to your notes.
I think we can let the video play first and then check.
Yeah,
Yeah, I tried playing the video.
yeah, the video is just buffering right now. I think that's why we can't. Nothing's happening.
Okay.
And you should be able to like look at your notes and still have the tab work
Yeah. It,
technically.
right now it doesn't seem to work.
Okay.
Uh, how
Uh,
about
okay, anyone who can share their screen, I'll make them the co-host.
okay, I have two more options to offer, okay, because we need to get going. Option one, everyone can open the link on their own laptops and watch from their laptop while we all write simultaneously. And I'll ask you to pause after top half for a brief chat before we continue to bottom half. Option two, I can share screen and write on my notebook as opposed to my laptop notes, and then I will need to send you pictures of the note taking as opposed to a document of the note taking. What do you think will be smoother given our limitations?
I'm fine with option one.
Yeah, I think option one works better.
And with option one.
Okay, awesome. In which case, everyone please enter the video I sent. Make sure that you're starting the debate at 3:41:30. Watch the top half, take notes as though you are judging an actual round. Stop after the end of the top half, and we'll reconvene, okay? Cool. Assuming instructions clear.
Could someone share the link in a WhatsApp group so I can open it?
Yeah, wait, I'll share it in the WhatsApp group as well.
Thanks.
Thank you for that speech. Like, welcome to the Okay, I'll give everyone another minute to finish the top half if you didn't already. Please pause by the end of DLO so we can start chatting before we continue to bottom half, okay? Okay, can I check that everyone have stopped and has finished watching up until DLO? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna briefly share my notes so far, because I want this to be a bit interactive and see how you head into the second half of the debate. This is connecting to what I said also on how we want to reach the call during the round and not wait entirely until after the round. So actually first, if I continue and show my notes, can I ask, currently is your intuition who is winning the top half, OG or OO?
My intuition is opening opposition.
Your intuition is
Opening opposition.
opening up. Cool. Anyone thinks otherwise?
I think OG is winning.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will say from the get-go, I'm also leaning OO here, but more importantly, I want to see what are the kind of questions you have. So, building up on some of the stuff we discussed in our first session, can I ask, what clashes do you have so far on the top half only?
Can I start?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I have three clashes. One in terms of what are these incentives or like how are these conditions framed for you to love like conditionally or unconditionally. Second is just your ability to opt out of bad relationships and like last is obligation to your parents versus obligation to yourself.
Okay, so I'll address the second one soon. Question, the first one on are these good conditions or bad conditions? Is that actually a clash? Does OP disagree on the arbitrariness of conditions?
Um, Honestly, I don't think so. They just try to prove that these conditions are good reasons for you to get some sort of worth attached to it or value attached to yourself.
Sure. So here's something that I think is worth noting. When we track the clashes, we want to make a good separation between what speakers say as their headlines and what is actually on clash between teams. I think if you look closely through the OO arguments, they don't disagree with the first OG claim on the conditions being arbitrary. They just say that the arbitrary conditions are arbitrary on both sides, that by the same metric, OG should also oppose any form of education or telling your kids that you respect them more or less because of these conditions if they think they are so arbitrary. And that by the end, even if conditions are arbitrary, we prefer that children still try and abide by them to protect their relationships with their parents as opposed to reaching a breaking point where it's too late. Yes, Ayush? Oh, wait, no, sorry. I was trying to enter the room. It looked like a raised hand for a sec. So I actually don't think this is a clash. I think this is an argument from PM that ended up being roughly conceded in the debate. What are clashes in the debate? So one of them is definitely what you said in the second point on after the breaking point, how easy or hard it is for kids to leave their households or feel okay with their parents abandoning them. What are other clashes we have? What do you think? Yes, Aryav?
So it's relationships, more centered around familial relationships, but DL also broadens it to how we interact with other people in society.
Mm-hmm. Correct. That is another clash. And there is, I think, one last clash, which is easy a bit to miss because both of them had it mixed up a bit with the abuse clash. Okay, so let me show you my notes at this point, I think. So this is, by the way, my content page. It's long. We won't go over all of it right now. If you want, I'll send you all everything later. I have nothing to hide here. But I'm more interested right now in sharing the meta process because I think this is the real process through which we end up reaching a call by the end. So first, very briefly, the summary. Tell me if you think I missed something. But if I'm only looking at bottom lines, not looking in depth into analysis mechanisms, yada yada, OG had 3 points, OO had 4. OG says 1, conditions are arbitrary. 2, this will harm parent-child relationships. For example, it will make them keep more secrets. And thirdly, abusive parents will be more likely to then push their child away and leave their child with trauma. OO has 4 arguments. 1, the child feeling more worthy of love when they have to earn it. 2, that this will improve relationship between parents and children when both of them feel like they are not taken for granted. And 3, that abusive parents will be easier for the child to leave and escape the abusive household, plus some mitigation on abuse within this claim. Also, that it feels less bad when a parent pushes me away, as opposed to when I think this is the most unthinkable thing and I came unprepared for it. Lastly, they have a claim on other relationships, aside from familial relationships, and how we model them in a worse way. Did I miss anything you think in terms of bottom lines from each team? Okay, and you can tell that I've already flagged to myself for later if I need more tracking where I can find more extension on this, because obviously I will need to assess the quality of analysis for all of these, and my content sheet is very, very wordy right now. I don't want to search a lot through it. So I have a roadmap here. Arbitrary conditions was in PM. Parent-child relations, PM. Abusive parents, somewhat in PM, but mostly in DPM. Similarly, feeling worthy of love was LO. Better relations with parents came in both speeches. Abusive parents came in both speeches, and other relationships came in DLO. If I want to make it more specific, I can also write before the POI, after the POI, in point 1, in point 2, whatever helps me quickly find the specific content later. So far, is the summary something that's clear? Yes, Dev.
I actually have some doubt. It was actually discussed further, like in a previous workshop, but like I was facing making the summary even in the debate.
Yeah, what?
Like when I was making the notes, I was actually having trouble like simultaneously pointing out the summary. So when is the
So I
actual?
think So I think the reason why I do both summary and clashes is because summary is a bit easier and more straightforward to do, and clashes require a bit more thinking and might change throughout the debate. Summary is very basic, right? I'm only thinking through what are the bottom lines teams are arguing here. I don't need to assess here who wins what, how they interact, nothing, just summary of bottom lines. All of PM here, what do? I look through what they do, they even give me headlines, they make it easy. First argument, they start with a roadmap. Conditions are arbitrary. Then they give several reasons conditions are arbitrary. All right, summary. First point from OG, conditions are arbitrary. Second argument, this will lead to deterioration of familial relationships. Say that I missed the headline that they gave. I look at the analysis. Often good intentions lead to strict, harsher rules, but these rules are broken all the time. This means that kids still break the rule, they just keep it a secret. Okay, keeping it a secret sounds like harming parent-child relations. If I wanted to say the bottom line is just keeping things in secret specifically, that would also be fine. There's no issue if I would write here that the second bottom line from OG is kids being more secretive. I had an ad pop up, sorry, for a second. Yeah, I could equally write children keeping secrets for the summary part, that is fine, that is equally useful. And so on and so on. Whenever anyone says something, I'm just looking through what the bottom line is, I write it here. And that is usually relatively straightforward. Is there a question on this process?
No, but I actually have a question like what is the best time of writing the summary? Is the best time after completing the open half or like after the
I
speakers end?
usually add points to the summary once a speaker finishes their speech immediately. I don't need much time for this, and I don't need to see how it interacts with other speakers to write it. This is blind to interactions, that is undependent on them. When I write clashes, I need to actually wait to see how things clash.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Then on clashes. As you can tell, by the way, I did not finish writing inside the clashes myself, and that is fine. I'm not superhuman, and the aim of how I keep notes is not to force myself to write faster than it is actually plausible. But I made the shield so that it is very easy for me to fill it up later, whether it is during the round in dead time between speeches or in the first 2 minutes when I'm allowed to go over my notes. What do? First, I just try and briefly tell what the clashes even are. I notice from this, even here, this map, without looking at further content, I can easily see how some things clash here. For example, clearly both OG and OO have an argument on parent-child relations. I had it as the third clash for reasons, doesn't really matter, but for now, I know there is a clash on parent-child relations. Both OG and OO have arguments to do with abusive parents. I have a clash on abused children. And the trickiest part I had here, because that required a bit more thinking beyond the bottom lines they gave, is calling the other clash child self-esteem. And I could give it many other headlines. But basically what I'm asking myself is how do other things clash here? I noticed that the first argument from OG, arbitrary conditions, doesn't actually clash anything because everyone agrees on it. So I don't need it really inside my clash structure. I already have the second and third argument from OG within these clashes, but now I notice that OO has this first argument, maybe the strongest argument, and I wonder what does it clash from OG. And while I don't think that OG has arguments on children feeling worthy of love, they do clash on the happiness or satisfaction of children feeling like their parent loves them or not. I can call this clash whatever I want as long as I manage to show the interaction. It can be also child satisfaction with parental love, or child feeling loved, etc. The important thing here, to make it distinct from the abused children part, is likely case. I want to make sure in this clash, we talk about the edge cases. Both teams agree these are the edge cases, those kinds of parents who would push you away because you're gay or whatever. In this, both OG and OO talk about the likelier cases, whether it is from prop, the kids that feel like their parents don't love them anymore because they drank alcohol or had sex, whether it is from OO, the kids that feel like their parental love is for granted and they didn't do anything to earn it. Surely, I think that this clash will likely be leaning towards OO without even thinking farther, just for the fact that it did stem out of the OO argument. OG clashed it indirectly, but most of their analysis, now when I look at it, actually focuses on the extreme cases, and the abused kids, and those whose parents actually push them away. And they don't have a lot of direct claims on those kids that are the likely case, aside from them keeping secrets, which is child-parent relations. I don't have a strict call yet. I will decide later on more fully, but I already can get a hunch of where I'm leaning. I know that the first clash, for the reasons I just said, is probably leaning towards OO, because I think OG says very little on why kids will feel bad in those cases that parents don't stop loving them, but only say, I love you a little less. I know from abused children that my current leaning is OO, mostly because of the response I have in DLO, that I can write more later. But I have this intuition of, on either side, the chance of your parent stop loving you is relatively similar. And this is something they get away with mostly because OG never analyze why your parents will stop loving you just because of the perception that they can. And OO challenges this. And given then the framing that on both sides they are equally likely to love you or stop loving you, what changes then is not whether it happens, but one, your chances of fixing it before it's too late, and two, how you handle it when it happens. Do you live and feel like it is your right to live, or do you feel guilty about this and as though your parents fully hate you, which is unimaginable and not something you are ever prepared for? Then lastly, I have parent-child relations, which I'm genuinely not sure yet who wins between OG and OO. I might even lean OG here. But I have the intuition that OO is probably winning the first two clashes. Is the general thought process clear, regardless of whether you agree with the conclusions or not?
Yes.
Yes.
Like, do you have an idea of how we track the debate and how we use this to have an initial uncooked thought of where we stand before we step into bottom half?
Yep.
Cool. And this should also tell you what you expect from bottom half to win this debate. Like, I know now that CG's main threat is probably OO, and I know that to win them, they would need to either show why parental love is actually lessened when the perception of it is that it is conditional and not just perceived as conditional, or alternatively, why there are reasons for the average child, not just the extreme cases of abused children, to feel very big threat from it, even when their parents don't fully push them away. Maybe they'll surprise me with a different strategy, but I have an intuition of where I get into when I start bottom half. Okay, that being said, let's start watching bottom half.
Also, I'm sharing my screen again. Let me know if it's working now.
Uh, Harsh, I think we still don't have computer sound from you.
Is it still not audible?
You are audible, but your computer isn't. I was thinking we'll just continue as we did previously, so if we can't share computer sound and just everyone watches individually.
All right.
Just flagging, in about 2 or 3 minutes, I will ask people for their initial calls of the final round, and we'll have a quick discussion. Cool? So if you didn't finish watching, take notes, go over your notes quickly. Okay, are people ready?
Yep.
Cool. What I'll do now is I'll ask everyone to send me your initial calls in chat.
I think the chat is disabled.
You can send me a personal chat if you want, or otherwise visible. I don't really care if it's visible. We're not getting to an actual call, so I don't mind if you influence each other. Just write whatever you actually think and try and ignore others regardless. But I think you should be able to send me a personal chat as well. I have so far only received calls from 3 of you. I would want everyone to give their initial call.
Can you check? Like, I've edited my call.
Okay, I have 4 calls. I'm still missing calls from someone, I think. One person didn't send a call yet. Okay, I think we'll start talking regardless. I don't know if I'm going to get the other call, but you would not get as much time to actually get your initials in a real panel anyway. So I think most of us have a general agreement on the basic guidelines with one small distinction. So I will say from the get-go, and allow me to share screen as well. The way I see this debate is the following. I think the first goes relatively clearly to closing government. I think the fourth goes, unfortunately, relatively clearly to the opening government. And I think there is a close question between oppositions. I think for the most part, it is reflected in your initials. There are a few disagreements there, so let's see where is the best place to start. Okay, I don't think anyone had OG over OO. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we all agree OO is over OG, in which case I think we can continue. We've also briefly had this discussion earlier. Let's continue then with CG. Let me briefly check if any of you had either OG or OO over CG. Okay, one person whom I think you had OO. No, wait, you did not. Anyone had CG losing to either of the top half teams?
I don't think so.
Cool. Okay, anyone wants to briefly tell me, using the class structure, why you think CG is over, say, OO, since we have OO over OG? Yes, Aryav.
So CG explains that the other two clashes about abuse and parent-child relationship are relatively less important as compared to how the child perceives how their parents are going to perceive them or how much love child perceives. So CG argues that this is the clash that is likely to apply for most amount of people, and as this was Professor World Motion, this is likely to be more relevant. Then CJ explains why children perceives vague cues from parents, and this creates a lot of fear and insinuates insecurity in the minds of children. This not only takes away the ability for them to perform well, but also makes them like just feel discomfort, like uncomfortable or poorly loved. The same clash that open competition argues on.
Yeah, so to be fair, I will say, while I agree that the clash that became more important in the end is the clash on the broad likely case of child happiness as opposed to the clash of child abuse, I will also still say that I don't think it's so trivial or obvious just from the fact that abusive relationships are less likely. And this is a classic trade-off we have a lot in debate of intensity versus scope, right? Where you have many different relationships that are not abusive, but smaller scale impact potentially, and few relationships that are abusive, but very harsh, high intensity impact. And we don't necessarily prefer scope over intensity or vice versa. It all depends on the quantification of them. So how do we decide in this case? Because I do actually think that CG had good reasons for why we should prioritize the question of the likely case and how relationships are characterized as opposed to the specifically abusive relationships. They had two reasons, I believe. One was in the framing from member of Gov, the rest was in GovWhip. Anyone wants to suggest why you think that the clash on the likely case became more important than the case on abusive relations? Yes, Aryav?
Yeah, so I think the response that I do catch is that number, which is that escaping or in ambiguous terms going to cops is extremely hard because that might make you seem that you're breaking a condition and that you are attached to your parents, which is why you don't want to break such conditions, which is in comparison would be easier in an unconditional relationship or dynamic where you would be able to call out your parents.
Yeah,
I
so I want
think
to
I don't
connect it.
catch the one at the
I want to connect it for a second to the framing because I will say, on face value, if it would only be the rebuttal in itself that says, kids might not report to the cops. That is fine, but that is a classic case of what we would refer to as competing analysis. It could symmetrically be true that kids will be more afraid to call the cops because they fear losing their parents' love, but it could equally be true, like Op says, that they are more willing to lose their parent love when they don't feel guilty over stop loving their parents, the expectation that they should always love them. I think, however, there are two things here that help. One, coming clearly in framing from member of Gov. Their extension actually does co-opt, I think, also the edge cases. And this is where the response also connects back to the extension. Because the entire question of how would the child respond to an abusive parent is contingent a lot on how a child interprets this narrative or perception that love is conditional or unconditional. If I believe that the child will perceive this as though, well, it means I can afford to stop loving my parent, but I don't actually fear losing their love over every small thing, then yes, I am likely to stand my ground and eventually leave if I need to. But in their analysis, connecting then to their framing, CG does two things, and this is where they are weaponizing their analysis as a sort of weighing. One, that they explain why children care a lot about their parental love and fear losing it more than anything else in the world. Meaning that regardless of the guilt that they feel or don't feel over stop loving their parents, they don't feel like they can afford to lose it. Two, in the analysis and why the likely interpretation kids have is that every action they do could risk losing it. And therefore they will be extra cautious before doing anything critical of their parents, which makes it sound as though their analysis is logically prior to the question of abuse. I'd say there's another point, however, and this is something that we get in government whip later. But government whip also says, in part of their impacting of how the interactions look like, that the actual impact or intensity of harm in this case is also larger, not just the scope of how many relationships we impact. Why? Because in the case of a parent already being abusive or already shunning me away, it's not like the impact that OO gets to claim is the abuse itself. The abuse is the more intense impact. But that is something OO concedes will happen anyway, with the difference being how the child responds to this. CG says it is, one, more important that a child can leave an abusive household than how bad they feel over leaving it. It is more important that they just don't stay in a household that is dangerous to them. And two, CG also adds that in the cases that you are already being abused by your parents, there's honestly just very little impact or delta to how much worse it gets. Whereas in the good cases, the likely cases, even though they sound good, the impact is actually really high. It's much more than just how you feel. It is how it impacts your autonomy, your choice to be yourself, to be what you want to be. So I think they end up weighing this clash as more important in several parts of their cases. So far, is this clear and intuitive?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Within the question then of the likely case, why do you think CG wins over both OO and OG? I'll remind you on the likely case, OO has that kids will feel more worthy of love when they feel like the love is earned. And on the and from OG, while we didn't have much directly on the child happiness, we did hear that in the likely case it will harm parent-child relations because children will hide more stuff from their parents. So why does CG win over both of these? Yes, Aryav?
I think CJ explains that it's more important how children perceive parents' behavior as compared to parents' behavior or interaction itself, and then goes on to explain why children are likely to have an irrational amount of fear. And I think they also explain that this is contingent upon not meeting conditions, but this preemptive fear that I might end up feeling and losing out on the love of my parent makes you perform significantly less productively, and this increases the scale at which you're able to meet such conditions. I think why this is better than opening government is because opening government only explains the amount of arbitrary conditions that exist, and that some of them the children might likely break. What this explains is that even if children have an intention to meet these conditions, it is often this pressure of conditionality that forces them to not be able to do so. So it's stronger and applies to a
Yeah,
larger number of cases.
I think CG also say, by the way, that their case is actually not contingent on whether or not conditions are arbitrary or not. Hold on, let me see where they had it. I noted it to myself. And here, there we go. It is important because it shows that kids feel unloved for random things, regardless of whether or not conditions themselves are arbitrary. Because even if the parents set good conditions, the kids will interpret arbitrary things that are not the real conditions as conditions for love. That's the framing in GovWhip in the first clash. So they become non-contingent at all on the OG framing of whether these conditions are arbitrary or not. I will add one last thing, and I wrote it here as well. Aside from the feeling worthy of love bit sounding an impact on face value less important and more fluff than just having less autonomy to fully be yourself, I think also that this impact is contingent on the premise that kids indeed feel like they are loved and that they earned it. If I believe CG, and I believe kids will feel constantly like they walk on eggshells and they are not earning their parents' love, and they will overly err on the side of assuming that they are losing their parents' love, this is when they don't get the benefit of feeling worthy of love. And lastly, I will also point out that GovWhip also gives a direct response to this OO claim when they say that you can get the benefit of feeling worthy of love from other relationships in your life that are expected to be conditional and that OO concedes are conditional, like the love of a romantic partner or the love of your friends, whereas the benefit that they show is more unique to the only source of unconditional love in your life. Is this clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, let's discuss CO. I think CO is the team that is hardest to position in this debate for various reasons, which goes to show in the fact that in your calls, I've seen them everywhere between first and fourth. Anyone wants to tell me what they think the CO extension actually is? Yes, Aryav.
I get two things that's here. The first is that irrespective of the perception, parent-child relationships can often be conditional and can often lead to incidences where you don't meet these conditions, parents are disappointed. So the debate is just about perception, giving you clarity, or you living in an ambiguous term where you don't know where you stand against your parents. So clarity and information with respect to what these conditions are and how children are able to meet them. I think their second extension is with respect to whether these conditions are well placed or poorly placed, and how do parents interact and place these conditions on the children, and whether likely to do this in a good manner.
Okay. Quick question on the second. I agree on the first. I have the idea of more clarity and transparent communication, which, by the way, sounds a bit similar to stuff I got already in DLO, which gets me to check later how much of an extension there is there, but I think there are stuff that are new. The part on whether or not the conditions that parents set on their kids are good or not. I had this in UpWhip. I am not sure I had this in Member of Up, although there was a part from Member of Up that I did not understand, so it might be there. Can you tell me from Member's speech what mechanisms or analysis you got on why the kind of conditions parents place on their kids are likely to be good conditions?
I think member of op explains that love itself is extremely intimate, and that you want something that is personalized. The way you interact with the child is different and special with respect to the outer world. So you often set personalized conditions or conditions you think are important to you, and that parents have themselves like a need to protect their children, or presumably pose rules that are good for the welfare of the children. I think the example that member of op uses is that oftentimes asking children to not have to have sex only after a certain mature age is good for them, presumably.
Okay, so this is what they give in this part, right? When they answer the arbitrary conditions part, The nature of family love is different. It's much more intimate. It's case by case. It's not the same as political discussion. We don't let politics get into family life. By age 14 or 16 or whatever Milosh thinks it's good enough for kids to have sex and drink, you can have the maturity to have conversations with your parents. That part.
Yep. I also think that this indicates that this debate also has to answer the question of what kind of conditions parent place. And I think this is where the argument starts. I think this does get answered at Above.
Yeah, putting aside the answer though, here's the part that is unclear to me, and maybe you can help me with that. I am really lacking the bottom line or normative value of this. I believe, MO, that parents have the incentive and care to set good conditions to their kids. I'm not sure why it means that the conditions will be good and will be not arbitrary. Because the things that PM said earlier sound like they still hold, even if the parent has the best of intentions, right? The idea that what they believe to be good is often arbitrary based on their surrounding, based on their own family, based on their genetics and how paranoid they are. Like, it sounds to me like even a parent who wants to be a good parent and cares about their child can still set arbitrary conditions like don't be gay.
So I think this does not explain that the conditions are good. This does explain for me in bottom line is how the way parents place and convey these conditions to the children is in an effective manner and a good manner, which is that they have to justify why these conditions are placed on children, how to meet them, what are the consequences of not meeting them or meeting them, etc. I think
Okay.
this also conveys better than that the reinforcement of motivation, which we thought were previously quite weak at all.
Okay, so here I think the important thing is to recognize what it does and what it doesn't do in the debate. I think all of this is very important to how the conversation is being conducted, to the clarity kids get, and to parents not wanting their children to get hurt. And I'll address this a bit more in terms of how it engages CG later, which is also important. However, in terms of being an independent path to victory that is not connected to better communication or clarity that we said in the first extension, I don't think in and of itself there's a positive bottom line or benefit of parents setting these conditions just by showing that they have an incentive to set good conditions without showing that they do. If they had an extension that says this makes kids avoid behaviors that are bad for them, such as having sex too early, and not avoid things that are bad for them, then they would have a separate path to victory here. I'm just not sure that they prove this. I think the closest they get to it is ironically in Upwhip. Upwhip says, where did I have it? Here we go. Upwhip had in response to opening government that even if parents have arbitrary conditions, they are probably best and better positioned to know what is good for you than the child, that the child probably has more arbitrary beliefs compared to you. And therefore, it is good for parents to restrict the choices of the child, such as alcohol or sex, because in most cases, they would err on the better outcome than the child themselves. That is, I think, the closest I get to a normative, impactful bottom line of this improves the life of the child. But do we have anything from member of OP as to why we create better life for the child? Yes, Sanyot?
Hi, I hope I'm audible. I think what I get from member of op is two things. One, they're able to tell us that why this child is much more able to have this self-esteem of they are not the problem in the first place. But secondly, it is just going to make them either make them have this agency to choose how much emotional investment did they have to do in the first place or not. I think this is something that clearly differentiates between
So this is part of the first extension. I think I agreed, and I think we all agree that member of UP has some extension on the clarity of communication bit, right? On communicating clearly to kids what to expect from their parents and how to manage these expectations. There are some similarities to DLO there, but I do think in the end there is a meaningful extension there. What I say is I don't think CO ends up having a separate path to victory independent of this extension, only based on proving that parents set non-arbitrary conditions. Or does anyone think otherwise? Anyone think that there is a clear, impactful bottom line that CO has on parents setting good conditions, independent from better communication?
So perhaps my doubt is with respect to OpWip's material that emphasizes the strongest push for it being enough for that to be an independent pathway.
So here's what I think on what OpWhip does, if we are primarily considering the OpWhip response here. I think the OpWhip response to OG here is enough for me to say that they take down effectively this argument from OG and is relevant in comparing CO to OG, in that it does convince me that even if OG is correct and conditions are arbitrary, that is at the very least not worse than the conditions that kids would set up for themselves. I don't think, however, this is enough to put them on this part, at least, above either OO or CG. Because aside from showing that OG is uncomparative, I still don't think, even after this rebuttal, there is a real constructive case to show why we put kids on a much better path this way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Just before the restrictions are good part, in my notes I have this section on why the goals that parents set for kids will be sensible. I haven't completely tracked this, so if someone else has tracked this better, this might be something that contributes to the
Which part?
just this part on OpWeb that says the goals that parents set for their kids will be sensible.
I can read out to you what I have. Hold on, here.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out whether we're talking about whether that is
After the weighing, when they say in response to OG, while
yeah, I think this is before OG. So if anyone else has that in their notes, I think that would clear it up.
before OG, not sure I follow.
Yes. Just before the response to OG, when they're talking about the restrictions part, that your cursor is just like 2 lines above. They just have the section on goals will be sensible. Is this the part that we are referring to in this
So
reply
the
to
part
OG
on saying
section?
goals will be sensible, I have something in member of op, which, as I said, I don't think is ever connected. They say that family love is intimate and different from other relationships. It's case by case, unique to the child. I'm not sure that is connected to a normative value.
Yeah, I agree. I was just checking if there was actually some tracking material that someone else might have tracked. Fair. I don't think there is. It's okay.
Okay. In which case, we want to assess how to evaluate the main contribution that CO has on clarity of communication compared to other teams. Let's start by directly comparing it to CG because here we have a direct clash, so it will be easier, right? CG says good communication, bad communication, kids misinterpret. CO says this creates comparatively more clear communication. I think one of you had CO over CG, so would that person want, yeah, I think Aryav, would you want to justify why you think CO wins over CG? Presumably you would have them effectively flip the likely characterization of the discourse.
Yep. So this is the clash of contention of clear communication. I think the first thing that closing opposition highlights is that relationships are conditional irrespective of how they're perceived, and that this conditions being not met means parents still give the social cues of disappointment that closing government talks about that children end up noticing. So they explain that on closing government, these cues are something children face. They are just less wary of it because they think that this is an unconditional and safe space. What closing option explains in comparison is that if these conditions end up these conditions not being met end up piling up, that these cues are extremely hard to ignore, and that there is going to be a time where these children often perceive that I'm unconditionally loved, but I'm still disappointing my parents. And I think this is where they essentially try to explain why it's extremely negative on CG. This doesn't flip because this happens in slightly less likely cases. So the reason this becomes convincing for me is their positive comparative, where they explain that parents by themselves, when they want to place and know that they can place conditions, want to do it responsibly and explicitly because it's effective for them. Because if you don't clearly communicate it with the children, the tendency for children to meet them is lower. They also explain that conditions are proportional and the conveying of conditions is proportional to the age of the child. So this explains that with maturity, the complexity of the conditions as well as the expected behavior out of children is going to increase. So there's enough margin of time for children to adapt to it. I think the silver lining is that in instances, some conditions that parents place on either side are not going to be met. On op, it's at least clear that you're aware of them, and that if you don't want to meet them, then you're able to calculate or barter love, which is that love is fungible with respect to the relationship you want to set against a parent.
Okay. So I had this as well. Here's why I still think that CG is winning this clash. There are several reasons. I think most of them eventually come up explicitly in GovWhip, albeit flagging back to material that we already had in Member of Gov. One, I think that CG does very effectively tie why this is not symmetric in that kids will always catch up and misinterpret cues from their parents for one very specific reason. CG is very explicit on why this overestimation of the risk and misinterpretation is a result of a fear of losing your parents' love, not just a general fear of disappointing them. They clearly say why this seems like the biggest thing in the world to a child, why this is something that they are most afraid to lose, and so on. And this is why, even if they catch up on some cues of disappointment on the counterfactual, they would not be as likely to fear the outcome of this on the counterfactual. The second thing is, I think that CG also points out that it doesn't matter if CO is correct and parents try to be extremely explicit. Because the fact that parents are very explicit still doesn't mean that kids will understand them the way they intend to. They say this in a few ways. One, kids don't know how to quantify what a little bit less means, even if you explicitly say a little bit less. Two, kids often don't know when you say explicitly to them something what you truly mean behind this or what the extent of love that you are losing as a result of this. And three, this conversation will likely be one-sided. Here they answer directly the mechanism that CO gives on, oh, this will be age appropriate, and by age 14 to 16 you'll be able to communicate and just explicitly ask them. Here CG says, it doesn't matter if you have the maturity to have the conversation. By that age, after so many years of having taught yourself self-censorship, it would be too late to have this conversation because you will just not ask. You will fear the very question would risk your parents being disappointed and not loving you enough. Hence, I don't think that this characterization from CO actually answers CG. It shows why parents will be explicit, not why kids will understand explicit, not why kids will be able to ask if they don't understand, and nor why, if parents aren't explicit, kids will have this over-analysis in their head and not just accept that as long as my parents still loves me, I don't need to worry so much about disappointing them. Is this clear?
I think it is. I think this is a convincing reason for me to fail. I think what
Oh,
it didn't do well is track the implication of the responses GovWhip had. Perhaps need a little bit more work on this, but I think this is fair.
okay. Then let's move on to weighing CO compared to top half teams. I'll start with comparing them to OG because I think this is easier. I'm more comfortable with them being over OG than with their position relative to OO. I do believe one of you had them below OG. Let me quickly check. Yes, I think Huma had CO below OG. Huma, do you want to briefly explain why?
Huma is no longer in the meeting, so
That is okay, that is unfortunate. Then we cannot have this comparison. In which case, can anyone else briefly explain why CO wins over OG? Yes, Aryav?
Sure. So the first clash, which is important with respect to parent-child relationship, is where closing oppositions material on communication being clear about the way parents want to initiate it or the way children want to interact with it, as well as the leverage the parents have over children reducing because love ends up being fungible, is able to explain that this clear communication is a better resolution to the guilt mechanism opening government has. So this takes down opening government's analysis on relationship being good or bad. I think uh, the other material about abuse. What closing opposition does specifically is just acknowledge that uh, the cases in which abuse is likely to occur or the pattern of behavior children are likely to have is not going to change on either side. Uh, but they do also end up mitigating the number of cases that exist within this by their frame that parents don't place arbitrary or unethical rules onto the children. I do believe this is still a doubt. This is a doubt in my mind whether closing option answers, which is why the scope or the number of incidences end up mattering. But I do believe that that the intensity so the intensity of better relationships that you're able to achieve at closing opposition ends up being significant as well, which is why this clash ought to be prioritized over the abuse clash.
Okay,
Can
I
I add
agree.
something?
Yeah, just a sec. I agree broadly on the mitigation of abuse. I wonder how much the clear communication in and of itself solves the problem that OG shows for parent-child relations. Because OG just shows the child won't communicate, the child will hide from their parent. And then I'm not sure what will be the platform for this communication to happen. Sanjay, do you want to engage?
Yes, I think OG's idea is that even if you are unable to, you are not going to be able to have conversations on both sides of the house, and that's the reason you are unable to change abusive parents, etc., in the longer run, because that's inevitable. I think CO has a good response or like a case which mitigates it. CO's framing itself takes down OG on a larger extent when they're able to tell you that how you have an ability to walk away from these relationships, which means that even if abusive parents exist on their sides, conversations exist, as Arif told you. That means that this choice of opt out and access to do so is something that exclusively is present on CO, which brings me to a conclusion that even if conversations are something that aren't fruitful on CO, people are still able to get out of this toxic cycle that is present in their lives.
Okay, so I will say this answers abuse, which I already think was answered. My issue is more with how do they engage the other case from OG and hiding from them. I will also add that this part I'm not sure is new. The idea that it is easier to walk away from abusive relationships definitely already existed in OO, and I'm not sure there's a meaningful extension there. Anyone else wants to add, especially if you can jump in on the question of how CO wins over the OG claim of kids will hide from their parents?
There is responsive material in closing opposition when they say that you can regain your parents' love when you know the conditions for it, and that good parents will preempt this behavior, so that is less likely to happen. I don't think this is analyzed to the complete extent, and I don't think it completely works as a response, but it is there.
Mm-hmm.
The rest, I don't think. I think it's a bit unclear.
So just to jump in, I think the one way in which closing opposition responds to the tendency for children to communicate with parents is that they explain that parents themselves start this clear communication of conditions. So they show a pattern of behavior that also tells children that it's again a responsibility for them to communicate back, which is that conditional relationship only works reciprocally when they both communicate. So this is what the parents teach the children, and that this is the action behavior children are likely to have. I think the second thing they do here is to explain that in an unconditional scenario as well, uh, children. I think what they do is just explain that in an unconditional space as well, you end up letting down your parents or end up disappointing them. Again, the same interaction that they had with UG. I think this also explains that there is guilt or there is poor communication happening on opening government as well. And that the slighter solution to this is the way parents initiate communication and transparency, increasing likelihood that children will do so as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think what they have is explicitly a mitigation that says kids won't fear that they would entirely lose their parents' love over just one time that they drank alcohol or something because of this clear communication. And the implicit stuff is more implicit, but to be fair, I think was a problem from the get-go from OG as well. which is some degree of symmetry. Like CO says, on both sides, kids will do things that will disappoint their parents, and on both sides, they will not want to disappoint their parents and to hear that their parents, who unconditionally loves them, is deeply disappointed in them. Well, they don't explicitly say the following sentence. I still think the following sentence is kind of begged from their analysis as well as from the OG case from the get-go. Why won't kids hide from their parents anyway? Why, when you're only afraid of disappointing your parents and not of losing their love, you would suddenly tell them about your sex life? I'm not sure that sounds that intuitive. Now, I don't think this completely takes down the OG case. I just think it does make it comparatively weaker, sufficiently for the CO analysis on the likely case is you are less likely to do these bad behaviors from the get-go to probably win over it. Okay. Do you feel comfortable with CO placing over OG?
Yes.
How do we compare CO with OO? That is, I think, more difficult.
This is the clash that is the closest for me, but I just think the closing opposition mechanism for communication leading to better relationships with their parents is more certain than opening opposition's idea of child self-esteem and like feeling worthy of love. Because I think the link here is a little uncertain. That why will you not feel worthy of love on comparative? The intuitive answer that opening opposition presents is that because you will feel like you have earned this. Why does that mean that you don't value unconditional love is something that's unclear. I think what is clearer is closing opposition's analysis on communication leading to better relations.
Mm-hmm.
Just one thing to add here is that opening opposition's impact on children's self-esteem is contingent upon the conditions that parents set being met. I think the missing burden then is the nature of conditions parents set. How do children perceive these conditions and are they able to meet them? I think a lot of analysis that indicates clarity in closing option extension also end up explaining why the likelihood for children to meet these conditions, or at least deal with the fact that some conditions that they can't meet mean that love is bartered or fungible in a specific degree, explains in a significantly better manner how children are able to resolve. So children are able to resolve the messy concept of love or familial relationship that they have with their parents. And I think this is the strongest clash at opening opposition as well.
Yeah, I think this was pointed out by a member of opposition when they mentioned that the fact that these conditions are going to be arbitrary, that means kids do not know what leads them to being worthy of love. They also claim that they are filling in that gap for opening opposition by clarifying the conditions for love through these conversations.
Okay. Anyone who has the other call and wants to justify why they think CO loses to OO? Okay, so here's how I'll sum it up. I tend to eventually agree that CO is probably over OO. I'll give you my 2 cents on how to sometimes resolve these kind of situations, which are trickier. Though I do think it will be a fair call to also flip ops. So on a very brief TLDR, I think the matter of comparison here is a classic case of width versus scope. CO has, I think, uncontroversially, the better analysis, specifically on the question of how well will this be communicated to children. I think OO, conversely, has more different impacts and more different clashes that they have claims on. And this is not just a bucket list of throwing around assertions. They do have some analysis for each of them. So On face value, OO has like 4 different impacts. CO has one line. Well, not one line, but like one case. And how do we compare them? Because they have more depth on this one case, but there is more cases from OO. And the part that makes it especially tricky is they did not win eventually on the clash where they had more depth, right? Like if they would win CG here, it would be trivial, both transitively that they win OO, and that because they won the more important clash, then we should prioritize it. But if they lost the more important clash, but just had better analysis on the more important clash, how do we qualify or quantify the value of better analysis on the more important clash that was still insufficient, that still lost, versus somewhat more analysis but on more different clashes? If both win OG and both lose to CG, and we can't use transitivity to answer this. I think oftentimes the question you want to ask yourself when comparing two teams on the same bench is who got them closer to winning over propositions? And I think in this case, if we consider that the main threat is CG and the way the debate unfolded, the team that had a better shot at winning the round was CO. While their engagement was not sufficient to flip CG, they had a more legitimate case against them. It was clearer CG wins over OO, particularly because in the way the debate played out, it became much more important, the one clash where they had stronger analysis over the other clashes when they didn't. In a slightly different iteration of the debate, it might not have been the case. But given what happened, CO's case is what got oppositions closer to closing the margin with CG than the OO case. Is this idea clear?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Cool. I'll send you or share with you this doc if you want to compare later. Again, I write relatively condensed, so it's not that much detail. Most of what we actually discussed won't be here, but if you want to compare note-taking, have a blast. Do you have questions on what we did today?
I think the RFP can go first. He raised his hand first, so.
Thank you. So I just have one question, which is with respect to practicing how we place closing benches clashes in the meta sheet, which is something that I was just not able to do at all because the tagline or the bottom line of the case ends up being some vertical or some different angle to resolving that clash. I'm just not able to identify.
There are many options here, and to be clear, clashes are here to serve us. We are not here to serve them. They are here to create structure and help us in get through the call. What I did is, to me, the question of how the discourse looks like, yes, it is a clash, but it's a clash that spills over to all other clashes in the debate. I don't think it is so separate or a clash that needs to be independently weighed against other clashes as much as it plays into other clashes. So I primarily included the additions CG and CO had in how they play into other clashes in the round. I could open another clash for this if it would be more convenient for me. It would be also a fair way to track this. Have an additional clash, which is how discourse looks like, and then right next to it, how this clash interacts with other clashes, why it is logically prior to all of them. Like here, I can make it even more explicit, right? Not this direction. Here, like this. Yes, Ayush.
Is this the same structure you would use if you were giving an OA? Like, would you use the class sheet the same way here, or would you make any sort of changes to your notes?
If what?
If you were giving an oral adjudication for this debate, would you
Yes,
use the
I would
same
use I
structure?
would use probably the same structure if I gave an OA. I maybe would have, rather than split clash 1 and 2, have like the child's happiness as a broad clash and as a sub clash abused children. But regardless, I would include both. And yes, I would have a separate clash for parent-child relations and for other relationships.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
None from my end.
Okay, cool. Have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.